Hello ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me for this talk on avoiding weight gain due to psychotropic medications, hyperphagia. One of the most alarming and universally unacceptable of medication side effects is that of permanent weight gain, and it's not an uncommon one. This video is going to focus on weight gain as a side effect of psychotropic medication, which obviously falls under the area of my expertise, but the general principles are applicable to weight gain from any medication or substance for that matter, including recreational drugs like marijuana. Weight changes due to the routine ingestion of a chemical compound, be it a prescription medication, an over-the-counter preparation, or some other substance, is due to one of three mechanisms. Number one, water retention or loss. The composition of normal body tissues is largely aqueous. About 50 to 60% in most adults is attributable to the weight of water. Water weight, though, is not what people are worried about when we're thinking about weight changes due to medication. And although the bathroom scale can sometimes represent rather impressive shifts due to this mechanism, and bloating due to water retention can feel uncomfortable and it can make your clothes fit snugly about the waist, this is a relatively modest effect that is seen mostly with prescription hormone therapies. It waxes and wanes depending on the dosing schedule, and it's not the kind of weight gain that involves an increase in the actual size of fat cells. We're really concerned about weight gain in terms of the accumulation of fat. And by the way, when you gain weight due to fat, you're not actually increasing the number of fat cells. That would be hyperplasia. And you would see that maybe if you had a lipoma, if you had a tumor of fat cells. No, each individual fat cell is getting bigger, is getting fatter. And so the adipose tissue, the adipose cells are accumulating fat by each individual cell storing more fat. And so the gross effect is that you get bigger, but the number of fat cells hasn't changed. But when you're just retaining water, that has nothing to do with fat. And in fact, there's very little water in fat cells compared to other cells in the body. But similarly, in the opposite direction, you might see diuretics. If you take a diuretic, which are used to lower blood pressure, they may also result in some weight changes according to the scale, but no actual permanent changes occur, and particularly not with regard to a person's girth when you're talking about medications that affect water retention and losing water, diuresis. You can also see a change in metabolism with some medications. A few commonly prescribed medications actually impact a person's metabolic rate, usually increasing the rate, because medications that significantly lower a person's metabolism, such as those used in anesthesia, are administered in highly controlled settings for brief periods of time, and they're not generally prescribed to outpatients. So we're talking about thyroid hormone, for example, which stimulates the metabolism, and it's prescribed in hypothyroid conditions. It's also used as an adjunct in the treatment of medication-resistant major depression. Treatment-resistant major depression. Medications that also activate the sympathetic nervous system, that increase sympathetic arousal, such as stimulants, they also increase the metabolism by virtue of the fact that they increase the activity of the central nervous system, which also leads to increased heart rate, and you get increased blood pressure, increased muscular tone, and muscular activity, all of which consume extra energy. Patients who take stimulants and who lose weight, they do so because those medications strongly suppress the appetite, not because the autonomic nervous system is activated. And certainly weight gain due to a medication or a substance is never the result of a metabolism that is ground to a halt. You'd have much more serious life-threatening problems if that were the case. No, although many patients are not typically aware of it at first and will honestly deny that they've changed their eating habits, virtually all weight gain that occurs due to medication and other substances is due to a change in the appetite. That's also true of these newer agents, Ozempic and Mounjaro and Wegovy and those agents. Those medications mimic hormones that have an effect on the brain that shut down the appetite. And there are other effects as well. They decrease gastric emptying time, so you feel fuller. You have a decrease in GI motility overall, and you also feel nauseated. at least at the beginning, as you're getting used to the medication. That's certainly a killjoy as far as the appetite's concerned. But let me just repeat that. It bears repeating. Weight change due to medication is due to a change in the appetite, either up or down. Okay, and by far the weight gain that you see as a side effect of psychotropic medication and other medications is due to this process. It's a change in the drive to eat. That is, a change in eating behavior. Understanding this is key to preventing and foregoing continued weight gain. Just as the anorexia that is induced by stimulant medications is responsible for the vast majority of the weight loss that's seen with those medications, even though they also slightly increase the metabolism, the weight gain that you see with many antidepressant and anti-manic and antipsychotic medications is due to overeating, including binge eating. And the medical term for this side effect is hyperphagia. Hyper meaning hyper, and phagia, which is from the Greek, and it means to eat. Now, it's not uncommon for people to swear that they're not eating any differently or any more than usual, leading them to believe that their metabolism must have shifted dramatically due to the medication. But in such cases, individuals are simply not noticing that they are in fact snacking more than usual, or that they have indeed increased their portion size, or else have shifted their dietary preferences in favor of sweets and starches. So what to do? Be mindful. The simplest, though not often the easiest thing to do is to guard your eating habits closely. Look for behaviors such as increased snacking, or really don't snack at all, or the tendency to go back for seconds. Because weight gain, even relatively rapid weight gain, occurs over time, there will be ample opportunity to curb it and then reverse it if you notice it in time. I always tell my patients when I give them a medication I think is going to be perfect for them, except for the fact that it causes weight gain in most people who take it, I just warn them. And if you're just armed with the knowledge and you gain 5 pounds, 5 actual pounds of fat, not just water, not just the weight of food, but 5 real pounds, then we can always do an about face. And you've got 5 pounds that you now have to lose, which may not be easy to lose those 5 pounds, but it's just 5 pounds. And it's worth having tried the medication, as opposed to saying, well, let's not even try it. If you're mindful, we can at least stop it in time if you just can't control the eating behavior. And many, I would say most people can't when you're talking about certain medications. Remeron, Zyprexa, Clozaril. It can be virtually impossible. And people that struggle with binge eating disorder or bulimia nervosa, or that have obesity and have a reason, a genetic reason for why they overeat, and when they overeat, it's chemically mediated, they know what it means to have a food addiction and to really not be able to control it sometimes. Often patients who are not cautioned about the potential for weight gain will be oblivious to it until they've put on 10 or 20 pounds, seemingly overnight, but really it takes a couple of weeks, at least a few days to weeks. So simply put, be cautioned. If it's a major concern for you, and since it's relatively common, always ask about the potential for weight gain, especially with psychotropic medications. Some medications are notorious for it. In psychiatry, these include most of the SSRIs, but especially Paxil and Lexapro, mood stabilizers, especially lithium and Depakote, and the newer so-called atypical antipsychotic agents, especially Zyprexa and Clozaril, among others. And among antidepressants, I think the worst one, hands down, is mirtazepine, Remeron. And I have another video on how Remeron is a perfect antidepressant, except for that one fact. Remember that although the weight gain may seem to occur overnight, it doesn't quite. It takes days to weeks to gain more than a couple of pounds. And I'm talking, again, real pounds of fat. So the first thing to do is to be aware of the possibility and to pay attention. That said, the other thing to know is that the urge to eat more, and that's more than your typical urge to overeat, okay, which almost all of us already experience to some degree or another at our baselines, simply from Evolution. Evolution has caused us to eat more than what we need and to store it as fat. It has evolutionary significance that keeps us alive. In Paleolithic times, when there was food scarcity, it was important to eat all you could, all that was available, because tomorrow there might not be any food. But this urge to overeat, this hyperphagia that's due to medication, a person may not be able to overcome it with sheer willpower. In other words, merely paying attention may not help you regain the control over your eating that the medication takes away from you, particularly if you already struggle with the issue, but even for people that don't ordinarily binge at baseline. But at least mindfulness will keep you from gaining an unacceptable amount of weight before you're even aware of what's going on, early enough to discuss switching medications with your doctor if necessary. Number 2, beware carbohydrates. Hyperphagia as a medication side effect is not indiscriminate. Instead, it's rather specific to sweets and starchy foods like bread and pasta. You're not suddenly going to begin craving steak or broccoli under the influence of medication. Rather, you'll crave the potatoes. Likewise, you don't feel like munching on green leafy vegetables under the influence of marijuana. Instead, when you get high and you get the munchies, you develop an acute hankering for ice cream, cookies, and chips. Substance-induced cravings are specific to carbohydrates. They're specifically carbohydrate cravings. Unfortunately, as many of us already know, we naturally tend to crave carbs whenever we crave anything to begin with. One way to distinguish substance-induced hyperphagia from an increase in appetite due to other factors, such as a depressed mood, for example, emotional eating. Another clue is the intensity of the craving. Carb cravings due to a substance or a medication are intense. And if you pay attention, you'll not only notice an increase in craving sweets and starches, ice cream, candy, but a sharply increased pleasure in their consumption. Certain foods taste better when the brain is amenable to them, and this difference can be really stark. When you're high on marijuana, food just tastes amazing. Or when you're on a certain medication, it tastes better. You're getting more dopamine release in those pleasure centers in the brain that are associated with eating that food. And so when you have the munchies, whether it's from a medication or from marijuana, it's essentially the same phenomenon. It's due to a molecular mechanism that's actually changing your neurochemistry. Of course, many patients do notice the increase in their appetites. In fact, many will report feeling hungry all the time, quote unquote. But hunger per se is not increased in hyperphagia. This is a fine point, but it's good to keep this fact in mind because it might help you to resist unplanned meals. Weight gain occurs precisely because you're eating when your body doesn't require it. So just because you're eating more, even when it's because it's your brain telling you to eat more, that doesn't mean that you're actually feeling hunger. Hunger is the discomfort felt by your brain when your stomach is empty and your blood sugar level is falling. Medication that causes you to gain weight will signal your brain that it's a good idea to eat, even when your stomach is not empty and your blood sugar level is fine, but it's a different signal. It's not a hungry, you're getting low on fuel signal. It's a, gee, that looks good, let's eat signal. And it's like when you go back for seconds and you're not hungry and you just ate. You're not hungry, but it's just, it looks good to you and you're craving it. Or you've had a full meal and you decide to go ahead and get dessert. That's not hunger that's causing you to crave that dessert and to really enjoy it when it's brought to the table. So it's the same mechanism. Medication isn't making you hungrier in the strict sense of the word, but you may have to actually remind yourself of that. Patients will say that a lot, though. I'm hungry all the time. And it's semantics, but you're not hungry all the time. You're just in the mood to eat all the time. You're just willing to eat, thinking about eating. And patients that are obese and that have food disorders, binge eating disorder and bulimia nervosa, they will tell you that they have food obsessions. And they don't want to be thinking about food all the time. They don't want to be eating all the time. They don't want to be binging and sometimes purging. But they can't help it. That's how they're hardwired. And it's not fair to say, well, they just had more willpower, because it can be overwhelming where you really can't help yourself. It would be like blaming an alcoholic and saying, oh, they should be able to take one drink and then stop. Maybe, they should be able to stay out of bars, and they should be able to not have alcohol at home and not hang around people who get drunk and not take that first drink. That's hard enough as it is. But yes, we can hold the alcoholic responsible for that. But once they take that first drink, they're goners and they can't control it. And that's the hallmark of that disease, is the lack of control. It's the same for food when you have a food addiction. And not everybody has a food addiction. Even those of us who are overweight and who eat more than we should and who are always on a diet, that doesn't mean that you have a food addiction. When you have a food addiction, that is a clinically significant, clinically relevant condition. It requires treatment, and it has nothing to do with a character flaw. It has nothing to do with willpower. So another thing you should do if you're on a medication that turns you into that person while you're taking the medication is to avoid temptation. The drive to overeat may be irresistible. And so if you don't want to change the medication, another strategy is not to place yourself in situations that will tempt you. The only way to overcome a temptation that you can't resist is to avoid it altogether. And this is doable because you're not actually hungry all of the time. You're not going to necessarily seek out food that isn't there the way you might if your stomach were actually rumbling and you were overdue for a meal. But if the snack is in front of you already and your appetite is in overdrive because of a medication, you'll likely succumb to the temptation to taste just as a little, quote unquote. But even if you're only sampling a little here and there, the cumulative effect is one of certain weight gain over time, which is one of the ways people don't necessarily notice a major change in their eating habits despite putting on a lot of weight. They're constantly grazing, and the pounds add up. So don't enable yourself. Avoid temptation. The problem is that we keep snack food handy. At our desks, on the coffee table, in front of the TV, on our nightstands, in the car. Food is usually within sight and often within reach, which enables the compulsive snacking that you can see in certain eating disorders and with certain medications. When you're prone to overeating for whatever reason, hanging out in the kitchen is an example of risky behavior. So is opening the refrigerator just to see what's there. Under any circumstances, if you wander into the kitchen because you're bored and you aimlessly open the fridge, you're much more likely to eat something as a reward for your curiosity. If you're already prone to overeating, or if you're under the influence of a medication that compels you to overeat, then to do so is practically to ensure that you'll have a meal that you don't need. So the rule to follow when you're susceptible to binge eating is to stay away from temptation if you can't resist it. Whether the inability to resist it is relative or absolute, and whether this is due to a medication or bulimia or some other neurological condition, take your cue from alcoholics who know to stay out of bars. Of course, you can't and shouldn't avoid regular meals, so you'll still have to watch meal choices and portion size for as long as you remain affected by hyperphagia. Will you develop tolerance to medication-induced hyperphagia, the way tolerance is usually developed toward other unwanted medication side effects? It's certainly reasonable to surmise that over time, the brain might lose some or all of its sensitivity to the appetite-stimulating effect of a given medication. Clinically, I've certainly seen this with medications that suppress the appetite. Over time, individuals become insensitive to the anorexigenic effect of stimulant medications, and their appetites return to normal. So it's plausible that the same thing happens with medications that stimulate the appetite, but it's difficult to say. It's certainly difficult for me to confirm that in my practice, because by the time such tolerance would be developed, weeks or months into treatment, a patient has either already gained a significant amount of weight or else in many cases has asked to be switched to something different to avoid further weight gain. And while it's true that an individual doesn't go on gaining weight indefinitely, and at some point a person's weight will plateau, even if they continue taking the medication, it's difficult to say whether this represents having developed resistance to the appetite-stimulating effect of the drug, or whether the new weight merely represents a new steady state for the hyperphagic individual. We tend to have a steady state weight, say for example, the individual with obesity, with morbid obesity, or the individual that has binge eating disorder and that periodically binges, even if they're not purging. There are certain people that just continue to gain weight and continue to gain weight until they become disabled by it. But most people tend to hover around a certain weight, even though they're always snacking and they tend to overeat and they're always on a diet and they're always struggling and they complain about food obsessions. So just like those individuals, patients that are on medication that continues to stimulate the appetite, that in theory is continuing to drive their appetite, they might still be having the hyperphagia due to the medication, but they're not continuing to gain weight. That doesn't mean that they've developed tolerance to the hyperphagia. That just means that this degree of hyperphagia due to the medication is causing them to hover around this new weight. I hope that makes sense. So it's hard for me to tell you. I can't tell you. I've certainly seen people on Adderall and on Ritalin. At first they lose a little weight because their appetite is suppressed, but then they either gain it back or usually they gain it back, or their appetite returns to normal because definitely they develop tolerance to the anorexigenic effect of that medication. But I don't know if the same is true of individuals who plateau after gaining 50, 60 pounds on mirtazepine and they're simply not gaining any more weight, but they still do appear to be getting up in the middle of the night and going and hitting the fridge and snacking and just having these really bad eating habits. Switching medications, of course, when all else fails, is always a possibility, and it might be in order. Unfortunately, dosage adjustments are typically ineffective. So while many side effects occur when a medication dose reaches a certain threshold level, and they'll wax and wane in intensity depending upon the corresponding dosage, i.e. they are dose-dependent side effects, in the long run, weight gain, which again, remember, occurs over time, tends to be an all-or-nothing phenomenon, such that an individual either will or will not tend to gain weight on a particular medication, regardless of the actual dose they're exposed to. So I have not found weight gain to be dose-dependent, particularly not over the long term. Lowering the dose rarely, if ever, corrects the appetite. So at best, it may slightly decrease the total amount of weight gain or else delay the maximum weight gain by a few weeks or months, but you get there regardless. So switching to a different medication in the same class is usually the best first option. I don't even bother to adjust the dosage, honestly. And I warn patients at all doses if it's a potential side effect. So it's better, the sooner you identify the problem and the sooner you talk to your doctor and you change course, the less weight you'll gain and the less you have to worry about losing later. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, so what can also be said is that discontinuing the medication will not necessarily result in weight loss all by itself. And so while returning to your normal weight will be much easier once you stop taking the medication, indeed losing weight can be virtually impossible on certain medications. Even after your appetite normalizes, weight loss is typically a purpose-driven, labor-intensive undertaking that can be quite a challenge, even 5 pounds, because you have to be taking in less than what you are expending, right? So you have to be restricting your intake. You can't just be eating normally. You can't just be not snacking. You have to be actually decreasing your portion size and burning off more than you take in. And so it's hard enough for most people to lose weight. Just because you stop taking mirtazepine doesn't mean that suddenly those 20 pounds that you gained on it are just going to come off. That's 20 pounds. It's going to take you weeks, probably months to get rid of. And another thing that I want to mention, exercise does not lead to weight loss. You don't lose weight because you're exercising all the time. Now, that's not to say that exercise is not going to help, because it's all about burning off more than what you take in. But you could be at the gym all morning long, every day, burning hundreds and hundreds of calories. All it takes is a slice of pie to undo the cardiovascular workout that you had that morning. Obviously, working out is a panacea. It's fantastic for your cardiovascular system and your mood and for every organ system of the body and virtually all illnesses, inflammation, your immune system. It is a panacea. So definitely work out as much as possible every day if you can. But it's not going to make you lose weight. And it's not why people that lose large amounts of weight, it's not why they lose weight. You lose weight because you're eating less. And if the exercise is a component of that weight loss, maybe it helps you get there a little bit faster, that's great. But it's a 90%, 10% contribution, in my opinion. You don't lose weight by working out. So these people, they take up exercise and that's going to be their way of losing weight, but they haven't changed their eating habits, they're never going to lose that weight. They're never going to lose that weight. You have to change your eating habits. Weight gain is going to occur over time. So catching it early and either modifying your eating habits accordingly or else discontinuing the medication after checking with your doctor, of course, will prevent any long-term weight gain. So for this reason, though, you shouldn't rule out trying a medication that's likely to help you based upon the risk of weight gain alone. There's always the possibility that you might not be affected. For one thing, you might be that rare person, I won't say rare, that uncommon person who doesn't actually gain weight on mirtazepine. I have some patients like that who will take mirtazepine and they won't gain weight and their appetite doesn't appear to be seriously affected. Or else that you'll be successful being mindful and compensating by not giving in to that urge to eat more and to eat more carbs. And you wouldn't want to miss out on a life-saving antidepressant or mood stabilizer that you truly need, that you might tolerate very well just based on the risk of weight gain. But just remember, it is hyperphagia. It's not a change in metabolism, and it might be something that you can't control. So just be vigilant from the outset, and an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, no pun intended. Thank you for joining me today.